Hey y'all, I've gone ahead and paused the slideshow on the program. Sallie, you can tell people to
So
look at the QR code now.
Everybody that's on now.
Sure, yes. But at 5:01.
Yeah, you can say it now and then
the music.
Hi, Jeff. I see you're on. Thank you. You want to test the mic?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you.
All right, it is 5 o'clock. We want to get started at 5:01. And just a reminder to keep on mute until you are called upon, as well as camera off. And I think we're almost ready.
Hi, everyone. I'm Councilmember Sallie Alcorn. I hold an at-large position, position 5, and welcome to the Sidewalk Summit. If you haven't already, please scan the QR code you see on your screen. I think everybody knows how to do that now that we've been at restaurants during COVID. Scan that and you'll be, your whole virtual program will pop up with everybody, all the panelists' bios and everything. So a lot more information if you scan the QR code. So welcome, and we'll get started in just a second. Okay, time to get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this Houston Sidewalk Summit, the first of its kind. We have a great program ahead with some excellent panelists. The program will consist of 3 20-minute panels. And at the end of each panel, if there's time, we will ask questions that have been submitted previously by the public. And at the end of all the panels, we'll definitely have time to ask some questions that have been submitted previously when you registered, or if you submit them during the program tonight. And that's also through the QR code. And I'll give you a link where you can go to submit those as well. I'm so excited. This evening we have nearly 300 Houstonians logged on to hear from our panel of experts and learn more about sidewalks. Let me just say up front the goals of what this summit are. They are to educate Houstonians on the city sidewalks rules, policies, and investments. We are looking to amplify the role of the pedestrian and assert that safe and well-maintained sidewalks are a critical component of Houston's transportation network. And number 3, we are going to explore ways that we can do better. To set some expectations, sadly, the summit is not a promise to fix every sidewalk in town, while I wish we could. If you have any questions during tonight's program, be sure to drop them in our form at bit.ly/sidewalksummitqa. Let me give you a little background on how this summit came to be. In October of 2020, I was selected to represent the city of Houston in Smart Growth America's Active People, Healthy Nation Champions Institute. Now, Smart Growth America is a nonprofit which empowers communities through technical assistance, advocacy, and thought leadership to create livable places, healthy people, and shared prosperity. I think that all sounds good to me. Through this 6-month program, I joined local leaders from across the country to learn about practical ways to advance safer and complete streets for all users, including motorists, cyclists, transit riders, and pedestrians. The course focused on how best to advocate for and promote activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. For my final class project, I proposed the idea of hosting a sidewalk summit in Houston, a gathering of local decision makers and stakeholders to discuss the state of Houston sidewalks and the need to prioritize investment in pedestrian infrastructure citywide. In my time at City Hall, I've noticed we spend a lot of time focused on bike lanes, which is good, trails, which are good, roads also good, transit also good, but we haven't spent a lot of time solely focused on sidewalks as a connecting network. And sidewalks are very important, and I'll tell you why. Improved safety. Sidewalks reduce risks by 28% when streets are redesigned to support walking and rolling. Better health. Residents in areas with sidewalks are 65% more likely to walk. Economic factors. Homes in major cities like Houston in areas with sidewalks have up to 5% higher home values. Additionally, tonight will serve as a more in-depth discussion and extension of the case for sidewalks, a presentation that was given at David Robinson's Transportation, Technology, and Infrastructure Committee on June 24th, 2021. If you are interested, I encourage you to check out the recording of this meeting on HTV's website. To help carry out the vision for the summit, I asked the Transportation, Technology, and Infrastructure Chair, David Robinson, to serve as co-host and to lend his knowledge and expertise to the event. And before I hand it over to him, I'd like to recognize council members in attendance. We have Council Member Evan Shabazz from District D, Council Member Carla Cisneros from District H, Councilmember Letitia Plummer from At-Large 4, and I know Council Members Peck and Council Members Kamen, District A and District C, intended to be here. They have staff here, but they are speaking at the GLO meeting, which is taking place at the same time, unfortunately. So I'd like to also first take a moment to thank the team at Smart Growth America for their guidance on this effort. You will be hearing from their representatives shortly. They have been a huge help in providing technical assistance to this project with funding from the Centers for Disease Control. So with that, Councilmember Robinson, I'll let you make a few comments.
Well, thank you very much, Vice Chair, and for your role at Smart Growth America. I hope you did well in that course. I imagine you placed well with this culmination here today, and I see that our mayor has joined us, and we're about to introduce him. I know I'm very lucky to have you as the Vice Chair of the Transportation Technology and Infrastructure Committee, which is in many ways what this is all about. And what a great champion our mayor has been for those things, not only with his passion and deliberate approach to investments in infrastructure, but, you know, as part of the Climate Mayors Network and the chair, he's committed to these things that are both focused on sustainability, resiliency, accessibility, making our city just more and better suited to all people in all communities. Very proud of this mayor and his commitment to complete communities throughout the city. And I know that the conversation tonight with the panels and with his leadership will be a wonderful event. So what could I do but say yes to you, Councilmember Alcorn, in a first of its kind initiative. I know I've worked with the mayor on a few of his first ever initiatives, and we may not be the largest city in the country, Mayor, but boy, you're a strong leader, and I want to thank you for being here. I wonder if you could say a few words of introduction.
Thank you, Councilmember Robinson and Councilmember Alcorn. Let me just start off by thanking you both for your leadership. And we do spend a lot of time talking about freeway road construction, mass transit, all of those things. But we certainly can spend more time talking about sidewalks. And I think people would probably be amazed the number of people that utilize our sidewalks or need to utilize them every single day. So let me thank you both for taking the lead here. And let me just say good afternoon and thank all of you for joining this discussion. I'm glad to be here with some of the city's greatest minds when it comes to city planning and urban development. Thanks to Councilmember Sallie Alcorn, David Robinson, and all of the directors from the city who will be participating. This is truly a meeting of the minds. During my time as mayor, we have made great progress towards increasing accessibility for all people, whether they walk, roll, bike, or drive. A key focus is connecting destinations to neighborhoods in a way that increases access and equity so that no person will be left out from an opportunity simply because they couldn't get there. Every person is a pedestrian at some point in their trip, and a large component of that pedestrian access is via sidewalk. Virtually every trip a person takes can involve a sidewalk, be it in front of their home, on a bridge across the bayou, or along Main Street in downtown Houston. So the availability and condition of our sidewalks is one of the utmost importance. We need them to be not only in place, but also in good shape, because I think we've all seen sidewalks. They are there, but they are not usable. A pathway is no good for a person in a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, or simply walking safely and out of traffic if the path is too difficult to navigate. When I delivered remarks at the State of Mobility event in May, I was proud to announce that the city had completed 50 miles of new and reconstructed sidewalks in the past year. The Walkable Places and Transit-Oriented Development Ordinance was passed by City Council to encourage more walkable development. The ordinance enhances the pedestrian experience throughout Houston's neighborhoods by creating customizable pedestrian-friendly rules to guide new development and redevelopment on private properties. Lastly, we also piloted the first ever Slow Streets project, where we closed McKinney and Dumble Streets in Eastwood to through traffic in an effort to separate pedestrians from vehicles moving through the area. The pilot successfully reduced vehicle traffic in the neighborhood and taught us lessons about engagement and communication. We are crafting now a citywide Slow Streets program based on this example. We conducted the city's first connectivity study, working with Councilmember Kamen to improve connections between Montrose and Midtown, which has resulted in multiple projects currently being designed and built by the city, TERS 27, and the Midtown Management District. And I must mention the Vision Zero Action Plan that seeks to eliminate death and serious injuries on our roadways by 2030. 9 months after releasing the plan, implementation is underway on 12 out of the 13 priority actions. So more recently, the Office of Resilience, Houston Public Works, and the Planning and Development Department kicked off our Resilience Sidewalk study with pilots planned for Gufton and Kashmere Gardens. So again, council members, Alcorn, thank you for your lead, and not just for leading, but being enthusiastic and very committed. And David Robinson, Councilman Robinson, being chair of TTI, just been remarkable in planning. You are our resident architect. So what you tell us to do, we do. So thank you both. And then I know it's going to be an enjoyable conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Totally appreciate you being here. And Councilmember Alcorn, I think we're ready to kick this baby off.
Great. And thank you, Mayor. It's a big honor that you showed up tonight. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for your vision for this city and really thinking about more than just cars when you talk about transportation. You are consistent in that. So pedestrians have a friend in you. So thank you for your great remarks. And we will just get right into it on panel one. Panel one is titled Cities Start with Walking. And I'm going to moderate this panel, and I've got a bunch of my friends on this panel, all city employees. We have Carol Haddock, the Director of Houston Public Works. We have Margaret Wallace Brown, the Director of the Planning and Development Department. We have Gabe Casares, Director of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. And we have Veronica Davis, Director of Transportation and Drainage Operations at Houston Public Works. And we have David Fields, Chief Transportation Planner, Planning and Development Department. So I'm going to start with Director Haddock, Carol Haddock. I'm going to have her kind of lay out what's our current situation with sidewalks. What's the city's policy and approach to building them, improving them, and maintaining them?
Well, as you heard from the mayor, our view on sidewalks today may not necessarily match historically how we built them. We view sidewalks as a critical component in our transportation infrastructure to provide access.
Director, I think you've muted accidentally.
Let me unmute again.
Okay.
So if you look at the sidewalks that we have around town, we did in one of our last citywide assessments of the pavement actually measure the sidewalks that we had around town. We have 16,000 lane miles of street, and that's somewhere around 6,000 actual miles of street that we take care of. And if you actually add it all up, we have about 5,000, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 miles of sidewalks. But the problem is they're not continuous and they're not necessarily accessible. And you can have 2 miles of great sidewalk, but if you're missing the 20 feet that you need to finish getting there, it continues to create a problem. And so we've got, if you look out there on the ground today, we have quite a challenge in addressing our sidewalks. Now, as far as responsibility, people well before everybody on this call, well before everybody in these elected offices chose as a city policy that adjacent property owners are responsible for the maintenance of the sidewalks in front of your property that's adjacent to the street in front of your property. That's something that we can discuss whether that's the right answer or not, but that's today's policy and that's what we work with. However, the city does build new sidewalks and replace sidewalks with the construction projects that we build in our streets. We build, bikeways, the hike and bike trails, which also function in that same area. We also have 3 programs that we currently build new or replace existing sidewalks. The first one is our Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program, and that's actually started through my colleague Gabe Caceres over in the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, and it comes to us as a top priority to address an immediate need in the community. We also have a program for safe routes to schools, school sidewalks. You've heard a bunch of different names through the years. We work with local principals to install sidewalks for children to access the schools in their neighborhoods, particularly in areas where they're not being bused to those schools. And then our final one is that we add sidewalks along major thoroughfares, which really provides that connectivity to transit and to shopping and to medical and all of those activities out there. So right now, as you can see, we've got what we have on the ground, but we have a vision moving forward that is definitely more holistic than the existing sidewalks that we have on the ground. And I hope that gives you a good starting place, council member.
Absolutely. So to recap, we have the 3 programs: the pedestrian accessibility, we have the safe sidewalks to schools, we have the major thoroughfare. We also, when we totally reconstruct a street, we build the sidewalks, and in the mayor's street rehab program, we are.
Thank you for bringing that up. We changed the rehabilitation program this year.
That's something new. So can you talk a little bit about money, a little bit about the investments that have been made in sidewalk infrastructure?
Certainly. So we have actually caught up our backlog, but we allocate specifically around $3 million a year, maybe a little over $3 million for sidewalk specific projects. And that is money separate from the sidewalks we do with CIP projects and other things like that. But it is specifically for these 3 programs and for other areas that may pop up that we need to address a gap or a connection.
And we are caught up on the backlog, because we used to.
We are caught up on the backlog.
That is great news. Well, thank you for that, and we'll come back to you with some more. But right now, I'll switch gears to Director Wallace Brown. The Planning Department is responsible for reviewing and approving sidewalk plans. Briefly describe the city's current sidewalk requirements and standards. Talk about widths and talk about walkable places and transit-oriented development and everything exciting that's going on with the Planning Department.
Certainly. So the mayor talked about walkable places and transit-oriented development ordinance that was passed last August. And with that, we made several changes to the sidewalk standard requirements, brought them up to some national standards. And currently, a minimum 5-foot sidewalk is required along a local street, and we require buffers on that as well. While a 6-foot sidewalk is required on a major thoroughfare major thoroughfare. Clearly, the wider the more active the street, the heavier the traffic, the faster the traffic goes, the more width we need on a sidewalk in order to provide more protection for our pedestrians. Within a transit-oriented development street, the street sidewalk varies from 6 to 8 feet, again, depending on the circumstance and the context right there. So, and then walkable places streets, which are designated by property owners, the sidewalk there varies between 6 to 10 feet, depending on what the walkable places plan is. So we took a big step forward in being both context sensitive for our sidewalks and in widening the sidewalks and creating a buffer to give pedestrians a much, much better protection than they had in the past.
Okay, and outside of walkable places and transit-oriented development, it's a 5-foot sidewalk, right? In
a neighborhood street, it's a 5-foot sidewalk, but on a major thoroughfare, it's a 6-foot.
Okay, got it. And the mayor brought up Vision Zero. How do you see the Vision Zero plan advancing better sidewalks in Houston?
Well, sidewalks are absolutely consistent with Vision Zero. The fact of the matter is, too many pedestrians die in our city every year, and Vision Zero recognizes that and prioritizes safety and accessibility and street design for people of all ages. So the plan establishes a priority actions to construct at least 50 miles of sidewalks each year, to update the design manual by prioritizing pedestrian and bicycle mobility and safe access to transit. It also identifies the street safety by implementing project budget that includes long-term maintenance costs. All these efforts will definitely advance better sidewalks in Houston and increase pedestrian safety.
Okay, one more. What is the city's policy on upholding deed restrictions regarding sidewalks? You know, there's some neighborhoods without sidewalks. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are some neighborhoods that were built without sidewalks, and we recognize that it's a challenge to require a property owner to put a sidewalk in the middle of a block where no other sidewalks exist on that block. And so over the last year, since the ordinance was approved, we've kind of learned a lesson about unintended consequences, and we're looking at how can we make changes to this ordinance, tweak this ordinance so that it provides us what we really want, which is a connected network of pedestrian safe sidewalks across our city. And one sidewalk in the middle of a block where no others will be built for any number of years really doesn't provide us to that. The interesting thing about deed restrictions is that, as you know, Councilmember, deed restrictions pertain to private property. It's the covenant between one neighbor and another. Sidewalks, for the most part, are built on public right-of-way. And so deed restrictions that may say no sidewalks can be built on the private lots really don't address the public right-of-way. And so they don't prevent the sidewalk from being placed on the right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. Very, very important point there. I'll switch now to Director Casares. Director, you have been such a great advocate for safety and for inclusivity. And I want to talk to you about how you and your team advocate for sidewalks and what's your involvement in the Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program.
Thank you, Council Member. And before I get to the particulars of the Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program, I do want to give folks a little color on the disability community. So we're talking about 215,454 residents with disabilities that call Houston home. Folks with disabilities make up 9.4% of the total population in the city. And as we get updated census figures from the latest count, I fully expect this number to increase. So as Director Haddock mentioned, my office oversees a Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program. The program allows residents with disabilities or someone acting on their behalf to apply for and request up to 1,500 feet of sidewalk replacement, repair, or installation to eligible locations where there is no safe path of travel. And there's a long list of eligible locations that would qualify for the Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program. So I encourage our viewers to check out more information by going to our website, houstontx.gov/disabilities. But Council Member, to give you a little bit more color on the program, in 2020, we completed 56 PAR projects under the Pedestrian Accessibility Review Program, totaling 4.7 miles of sidewalk replacement, repair, or installation, with a total cost of $2.2 million. In 2021, we're up to 71 PAR projects. So as you can see, ensuring that people with disabilities have access to our community is a critical goal of Mayor Turner's administration, and we're happy to support that.
Well, I'm very grateful for your work there. Very important work. How do people access the applications for this program, and what's required?
Certainly. So the application is housed online on houstontx.gov/disabilities, or if you call us at 832-394-0814, we're happy to assist folks fill it out by phone or mail one to folks. Once the application is received, MOPD staff review it to ensure program eligibility. A site visit is conducted, and if approved, the work is then forwarded on to our partners at Houston Public Works for the next steps.
Great. Really appreciate your work here. And next we'll switch to the new kids on the block. We've got Veronica Davis and David Fields. These are just wonderful hires by the city of Houston. They come with just stellar reputations in their fields, and I'm thrilled to have them here. Houston doesn't get such a good rap, right, on pedestrian and multimodal. We're kind of, everybody looks at us like, get in the car, drive, as far as you can, park, one car, one driver. And you guys are trying to kind of push us out of that way of thinking and look at all road users as being important. So both of you, and it doesn't matter which order, just give me your first impressions of Houston, and how you think we can do better, and how you then what the role of sidewalks is in our transportation network.
Thanks, Councilmember. I'll start. So one, my first impressions of Houston, there are actually very walkable neighborhoods where people can access parks and grocery stores and all of that. And then we are very much a multimodal city. I think that Houston gets a reputation for being a city of highways, but we have many communities that we work in, whether it's a complete community or otherwise, where people are walking because that is their only choice. Or unfortunately, sometimes we see people on a motorized scooter moving through the street because that is their only option, and to be able to move around. So every day people are making decisions that don't involve a car, partly because there may not be another option, and so that's what we work to do to make sure that we're facilitating safe ways for people to move around. But I also think Houston is a city of a lot of potential. I know the mayor talked about it being a destination city, and there really is a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of capacity on some of our roadways, and so that's one of the things that we work very closely with the planning department to evaluate how our public right-of-ways can be used in other ways to help also just make it safer for people walking.
Thanks, and I'll continue from there. So first off, Councilmember, thanks for having us today. The people at home who are watching this is a great team in front of you. There are a lot of very dedicated people, all with a consistent mission to help us become more of a multimodal city. And not every city can say that the planners and the engineers and all the different staff are working towards that same vision. It is wonderful to be here. I think Houston has a bad rap, and it's an unnecessarily misnomer that we're just a driving city. I've been here just over a year and a half. Most of that time during COVID, and I've seen more people walking and biking and out on the road not driving than anybody warned me of. This is a place where, in the right conditions, people do it all the time, but those conditions are kind of unique locations. Nobody, or what I'm told is very few people, are going to walk end to end of our 600 miles, but many people are walking in their neighborhoods. They're walking to the parks. During COVID, if anybody was out on our trails, our regional parks, even our smaller parks, you'd see tons of people doing it. So let's stop reiterating this line of nobody here does anything but drive, and start embracing the reality that people do everything here. Now we have to kind of start putting in the infrastructure that's going to make it safe, that's going to make it consistent, so those walks can be comfortable and longer, and we can start having a very different reputation for the future.
Great, appreciate that very much. Have a few minutes for some questions that have been submitted. I'll start with you, Director Haddock. You talked about, the city has a certain responsibility, and then for the most part, the neighborhood, streets, everybody, and businesses, neighborhoods and business property owners, homeowners and businesses are responsible for the sidewalks outside their building. So talk to me a little bit about, other cities I've heard of kind of cost share or do a reimbursement formula. This could help, and if you could talk a little bit about the range of like per linear foot of what a sidewalk repair looks like. What kind of money are we talking about? I know this is all about trade-offs. If the city decides to spend more on sidewalks, that means we're spending less on something else. So that's the hard discussion. But just talk to me a little bit about how we might be able to help people that need help maintaining their sidewalks.
Well, so I will jump in here, and I may ask Veronica to jump in and help as well. But when the city is procuring services through our standard processes, that is typically got more overhead and is quite a bit more expensive than when somebody is just going out and hiring a contractor to fix the sidewalk in front of their house. Because we as a city have more processes and more rules that we have to follow. We did find we had a not a reimbursement program. It was reimbursement, but a private property owner could ask us to do their sidewalk and they would pay us for it. And we had a contractor under contract to do that. And we found that in a capital improvement approach, it was anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 times the cost that you would normally see, in just an average neighborhood, of going out and getting a contractor to replace your sidewalk. And so it is, the question becomes, are there ways that financially we can help people? That's a completely different question than should we be doing it, unless we're using our internal resources and our internal crews. So I'm looking forward to the conversations in this, because I know that how we have done it in the past has not necessarily led us to the right answers. And so I'm looking for conversations that take us to new ways to look at how to approach these things, such that we might have a different answer next year than we had last year.
Great. Veronica, do you want to add to that?
Well, one of the things I will add, through our small contractor program, we are working with small businesses, and they're helping us build sidewalks as part of the sidewalk program, and it's helping them expand capacity, because that's the other part to think about, as we look to the future and potential other ways to manage the maintenance of sidewalks. It's the capacity to be able to do it in a sidewalk, in a city as large as Houston. And so it's also about building our contractor capacity as well as our internal capacity. And so that is one of the things that we are doing, is we do work with small contractors to help them establish and grow their businesses through our small business office.
Okay, great. And how much sidewalk maintenance enforcement do we do, if any? I mean, we've got a question from the public. What are some ways the city can better enforce sidewalk maintenance? How can we get businesses to maintain or repair their sidewalks? Do we do much enforcement in this realm?
Muted, Carol.
Muted, Carol, sorry.
I keep getting muted. So realistically, it's a reactive enforcement. We don't have eyes all over town, just like we ask people to call 311 for potholes and 311 for water leaks. We don't have eyes all over town for when we have sidewalks that there has been a problem caused. If we've got an immediate safety concern, we will remove that sidewalk and replace it with a surface that meets ADA requirements, but is not necessarily a concrete sidewalk. Because we want to address that immediate safety concern. But our first pass, if it's not a safety issue, is to work with the adjacent property owner, inform them of their obligations, and try to work through that process of communication.
Okay, thank you. And Margaret, I'll end with you. Someone asked, I'd like to understand the current requirements that allow a new developer to not install sidewalks and the latitude that the planning department has to grant variances.
When we made the changes to the walkable places in the TOD ordinance, we recognized that what we needed to be was consistent across the board, that one homeowner needed to be, or property owner needed to be treated the same as another property owner. The context sensitive was one thing, but being fair across the city was paramount. So we established a way in which property owners can apply to not have to follow the sidewalk standards, the new rules. There is a process. There is a committee that reviews those applications. Folks from the office, from Gabe Keseris's office, are on it. Public Works is on it, and Planning is on it. And we each contribute to an evaluation on whether or not the sidewalk, there is a reason to give an exemption. In most cases, it's really hard for a property owner to get an exemption, and so we rarely give them. Sidewalks are a lot like trees. When's the best time to build a sidewalk? It was 50 years ago, but when's the second best time? It's today. And so we take that pretty seriously, and we try to give very few exemptions. For the most part, if you are rebuilding or doing significant construction to a piece of property, you are, and your sidewalk is inferior, you are required to upgrade the sidewalk. On our website, there is a list of 2 or 3 reasons where you can get out of it, but your responsibility is still there. We are looking. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
So, one of the questions has been, so what if I own a property that doesn't have sidewalks in the street? We are looking at ways in which the property owner's responsibility cannot be waived, but in fact, we can spend that money, we can build the complete network that we're looking for. One of those ways we've looked at that we are talking with the community is perhaps we charge a fee in lieu of building the sidewalk. Maybe that makes sense in some instances. And so that's one of the changes that I mentioned earlier that we're actually considering for the sidewalk requirements. But we are, we have a lot of engagement to do before we make that recommendation to the mayor and to city council. And so we are probably several months away from completing that work.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate all of you. My panel time is up, but you guys stick around because there's going to be more questions at the end. And I really appreciate all of your good answers and good work that you do for the city of Houston. Before I introduce our next moderator, I'd like to take a minute to remind the audience at home to drop your questions in our form at bit.ly/sidewalksummitqa. Because we will have some time at the end. And to tell everybody who submitted questions when they registered or are putting them into the form tonight, if we don't get to them, my staff is gonna work with the departments to get everybody an answer. We know who's asked what, so we'll make sure to get everybody an answer. So we'll move on now to panel number 2, which will be moderated by my new friend at Smart Growth America, Mr. John Robert Smith. Mr. Smith is an integral part of Smart Growth America, but most importantly, he's the former mayor of Meridian, Mississippi. So we have an honorable in our midst, and he is going to lead the next panel. So take it away.
Thank you, Councilmember Alcorn. It is certainly a pleasure to be with you and the people of Houston this afternoon. And I'm going to answer the question that Councilmember Robinson posed at the beginning of this summit concerning your participation in the Champions Institute. Councilmember, we are here because Councilmember Alcorn was such an engaged and imaginative member of the very first Champions Institute that we held. In fact, there are only 3 cities that we have followed up for additional work, and Houston is one of those. So yes, Councilmember Robinson, your colleague scored high in her class at the Champions Institute. Our panel is entitled Sidewalks More Than Access, and joining me on today's panel is Laura Patino, Interim Chief Resilience Officer, Shannon Buggs, Director, Mayor's Office of Complete Communities, Enos Siegel, Interim Executive Director at Link Houston, and Peter Caldwell, Senior Designer at Asakura Robinson. First, I want us to think about 3 things very briefly. First, what is a good sidewalk network and what does it get us? Secondly, does equity actually have a play within our discussion of sidewalks and the funding thereof? And then thirdly, let's look at the different approaches some cities take to funding and investment in sidewalks. My work at Smart Growth America has taken me to now 128 different cities to work in technical assistance all over the country, every size from the largest to the very smallest. And one thing I have observed very clearly is that a complete streets network of safe streets, bike lanes, sidewalks, accessible for everyone, yields better health outcomes. It could help Texas address its 36% obesity rate. It allows access to the daily needs of life. Think of seniors who want to walk to get fresh food. It certainly improves your economic vitality. And as a part of that, it helps you position yourself for the recruitment of the bright young workforce that are looking for walkable places. And of course, they're safer. But for me, you roll all of that up into one particular critical point for a community, and that's the creation of a sense of place. Because any economic developer and any successful mayor will tell you that all cities are in a ferocious competition over the creation of a sense of place. And pedestrian facilities are as much a part of the community transportation network as your street or road. Improving the pedestrian facilities don't just improve the property that they abut, they improve the life and are accessible to all of the members of your city, all of your citizens, if they're done right. And when you leave the funding of those sidewalks to the local resident, then that's going to fall disproportionately on those who can least afford it. So as you look at your sidewalk investment, it's very important to make decisions on where you add and improve sidewalks based on certainly the equity issue, because you do want to appeal to all of your citizens and for them to see and understand they're a part of your vision for the whole city. So let's take a look at what other cities are doing. And Houston's not alone in how it addresses sidewalks. I think of San Jose. The property owners not only pay the cost, the maintenance and the repair of the sidewalks, but also the park strip, the driveway approach, the curb and gutter adjacent to the property, or the front and side of the property. Denver was doing that, but they're moving away from this model of the private sector paying for all of it and the resident paying for all of it through two programs. First, new sidewalk construction. They're filling in the gaps of the Denver sidewalk network by focusing first on connecting to transit, connecting to schools, libraries, parks, and city facilities. Secondly, they have a neighborhood sidewalk repair program. And yes, while the neighbors still pay for the sidewalk repair, Denver has an extended repayment assistance program and also gives affordability discounts to property owners who can qualify financially for that kind of support. You might want to consider those two options. If you look at Ann Arbor, Michigan, they passed the voters 60% approved of a sidewalk millage tax. So that millage tax is dedicated solely to the maintenance and repair of their sidewalks, and it costs each taxpayer about $13 a year in additional taxes. Certainly anyone can afford that as a way to help pay for the sidewalks. Then thirdly is my own hometown of Meridian, Mississippi, where I was mayor for 16 years there. In Meridian, it's an obligation of the city. So when a residential or commercial developer builds, they must build sidewalks to the specifications of the city for where they're building their property and their investment. But when it comes to maintenance, my public works budget at the city covered sidewalk maintenance. And we felt that was the fairest way to connect not only our downtown, which is enjoying a vibrant arts community growth there, where we literally tell the story of Mississippi artists in the sidewalk, leading you to the Mississippi art and entertainment experience. So it's more than just connecting you by walking, it's connecting you to my city and to our story and to our heritage. But we also do that in neighborhoods, especially in neighborhoods that are low-income neighborhoods, because it's important to be able to get to school, get to the community college, get to the job, get to the local transit system, and be a part of our community. And it changes how the people who live there see themselves as a citizen. So let's go to our panelists. Ms. Patino, please describe for us how Houston is doing with their sidewalk study pilot program in the Gulfton and Kashmere Gardens complete communities.
Mayor Smith, thank you for your question. You see, we've heard about what the city of Houston is currently doing, what the current regulations and what the current challenges are in the previous panel. And we've learned about how they're designed, how they're built, maintained, their ownership and the amount of funding available and how it ties into an overall vision for a safer Houston. But when you think about resilience and the ability to prepare, adapt, and thrive towards the disruptions that are faced by our communities, the efforts and focus that we place on sidewalks become even more and more important in conversations about our infrastructure. Sidewalks encourage pedestrian and cycling by reducing carbon emissions and directly contributing to the city's climate action plan. By implementing sidewalks in areas where there are none, it makes safer neighborhoods. Sidewalks that are designed to be accessible to everyone allow for better mobility citywide. But do we really know in Houston how sidewalks play a role within our mobility and drainage challenges? And we can guess. Harvey highlighted some of these challenges for sure. We have the data, we have collected data, we have made observations, and we have gathered community feedback, and now it's a time to act. Through Harvey recovery funding, we are advancing 7 resilience studies, and one specifically is on sidewalks. And the Resilience Sidewalk Study has 4 main objectives. The first is to develop a standard on how to address curb and gutter and roadside ditch neighborhoods that have limited or conflicting space for the right-of-way, where sometimes a decision has to be made to either place a sidewalk or a drainage ditch. And so we're utilizing Kashmir Gardens and the Gulfton communities as case studies, as they were both impacted by Hurricane Harvey, and they have had repetitive localized drainage challenges and have poor sidewalk conditions. And they're also part of the Mayor's Complete Communities initiative. The second main objective of the study is to replicate and scale solutions for the 2 communities using a citywide toolkit. We must also recognize that not all neighborhoods are the same in Houston, and they have different challenges. But by focusing on these solutions, we can devise strategies for equitable strategies for a vital element of our urban infrastructure, which is sidewalks. And finally, the 3 and 4th objectives of the study are to develop implementation guidelines, which include maintenance, funding, and policy implications, and advance the goals of Resilient Houston. And the project is going to leverage the current data and the current planning efforts that we've heard about from our colleagues in the first panel, update the sidewalks condition inventory, and produce a new map that was going to showcase the high priority areas and can also compile learnings from other cities. It's going to develop the sidewalks pilot program for each of these 2 complete communities that are identified as case studies, and then develop the sidewalks design and construction materials and implementation toolkit that will help replicate it across Houston at all scales in all neighborhoods. And finally, it will propose an implementation strategy for citywide implementation, including identifying funding for future repair for sidewalks, the maintenance, and the policy considerations that are case specific. This whole project is going to be completed by 2023, and as I mentioned, is going to be funded, and it is being funded by the Harvey recovery funding. And what's really unique is that it will involve interdepartmental coordination with many of the folks that have spoken here. This means Houston Public Works, the Planning Department, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, the Resilience Office, and the Housing Department. It offers an opportunity to go beyond what we're currently doing and understand ways in which the city can work more innovatively to solve for multiple challenges at once. It's going to involve many experts as well. And so if you would like to stay informed and also be part of this process, be part of the committee for the toolkit development, you can email me directly at laura.patino@houstontx.gov. or contact our office at 832-393-1123. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Ms. Siegel, Link Houston advocates a robust and equitable transportation network. So describe your advocacy efforts and how you work with the city. And then where do you see the greatest need for sidewalks and how do you incorporate equity into that?
Thank you so much for including Link Houston in this critical discussion. So transportation, how we get to where we need to go, should not be a barrier to reaching affordable housing, jobs, education, healthy food, or anything else we need or want in our lives. At Link Houston, we analyze data and engage communities to understand their needs and to serve as a resource as they organize and advocate for changes in their neighborhoods. Our most recent data analysis shows 867,000 people in Houston live in areas with high demand for more affordable transportation. That includes sidewalks. We developed a metric called the Transportation Equity Demand Index, comprised of 15 different built environment and socioeconomic indicators to determine where the highest demand for investments exists and where it is most feasible to prioritize investments. Through our data analysis, we also understand that a significant number of people in Houston who walk, bike, or use a wheelchair are seriously injured or killed in crashes. And these crashes disproportionately impact people of color and people in low-income communities. Transit and walkability, as well as safe biking infrastructure, are key components we envision for an equitable transportation system, a system that is safe, accessible, dignified, and mitigates climate change impacts. Equity in transportation refers to the fair and just distribution of benefits and burdens of policies and infrastructure across communities. Pursuing equitable transportation policies, programs, and investments means addressing institutional barriers and systemic racism to advance equitable outcomes. It means valuing people first and foremost, meeting them where they are, communicating clearly. Most people are not technical experts, but their lives are deeply impacted by these issues. And it also means prioritizing investments in areas that need them the most based on past injustice and present conditions. The focus must be intentional. We need to create well-connected, safe, and accessible sidewalks that will get us to transit and other opportunities. And we need to maintain existing infrastructure in more equitable ways. This responsibility should really rest with the city, county, and other stakeholders like Metro, the Houston-Galveston Area Council, management districts, and TERSIS, entities with much more resources than individual homeowners and with the responsibility to address equity. I would also like to stress that any plans and any improvements for sidewalks must take affordable housing into consideration. We have to preserve existing affordable housing and ensure that future projects are built near affordable transportation options to improve access to opportunity. I am really glad to hear of all of the new initiatives that are taking place in Houston, and I want to thank Council members Alcorn and Robinson for hosting this important discussion. We'll look to you and your colleagues for leadership on how to take this to the next level to improve safety, accessibility, and walkability in Houston. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Buggs, you're concentrating on bringing resources to neighborhoods that have been neglected and underserved for decades. So tell us how the Mayor's Complete Communities program is advancing better sidewalks and meeting those two needs.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Smith. It's great to be part of this panel discussion. And I really do thank Inez Siegel for explaining to everyone what equity in transportation is all about. The Complete Communities Initiative, launched by Mayor Turner in 2017, is an equity initiative that is meant to address the quality of life issues that is lowering the quality of life for so many people living in our most under-resourced and underserved neighborhoods. And through the process of community engagement and community planning, which was led by our Planning and Development Department, and happy to have had Director Margaret Wallace-Brown help to start this conversation in the first panel. But through that community engagement process with the Complete Communities, we identified their highest needs around several issues, including mobility and infrastructure. For those who don't know, there are 10 Complete Communities, and we started in 2017 with 5 and added an additional 5 in 2019. All of the Complete Communities neighborhoods have prioritized improving sidewalks and streetscapes and their streets within their Complete Communities. They recognize that as being under-resourced and underserved neighborhoods for decades, that they do not have the same quality of infrastructure in their neighborhoods as has become standard in other parts of our city. And so we work with all of the departments and divisions of the City of Houston in order to advance the initiative, which is based on the resident engagement. The residents tell us what they think is important for improving their quality of life, and then they help us to prioritize that work. And so we work with all of the different experts. Link Houston, of course, is one of them that helps us to continue to advance the conversation. But then we also do a deeper dive once we have those action plans in place, and you can find them at houstontx.gov/complete communities, where you can read exactly what your neighbors in our Complete Communities have said about their concerns around a variety of subjects, including affordable housing and parks and community assets, but particularly the mobility and infrastructure where they're discussing their concerns about sidewalks. We've assembled all of that information in the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities into RIKE, a system that we're using to better coordinate the work between the various departments and divisions to address the initiative and to make progress on those goals and aspirations that the residents identified in their action plans. We have about 18 different programs around sidewalks alone. And my personal heroes in moving this work forward are Veronica Davis in the Public Works Department and David Fields in the Planning and Development Department. They have prioritized this work as well as along with the residents' concerns and helping us to continue to do ongoing community engagement with our lead planners from the Planning Department in order for us to move the needle on getting these projects done and helping us to reassess what's in our community capital improvements plan with the direction of very dedicated directors, Carol Haddock in Public Works and Margaret Wallace Brown in Planning Department, to make sure that the work of the Complete Communities wasn't a plan that just sat on the shelf, that is a living initiative that is moving and advancing the work every day in partnership with residents.
Very good. Thank you so much. Now, Mr. Caldwell, Houston certainly has an interesting environment and an interesting climate, whether we're talking about blistering summers, tropical storms, hurricanes, or ice storms like we saw last year. All of those have impact on the sidewalks. Tell us about that impact, and then especially tell us if you have any creative ideas about how to deal with the damage from the natural environment and tree roots as well.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I'm an outlier, I think, on the panel as being a designer, and I am actually. You can see the sidewalk in my screensaver. It was actually installed through one of the programs by the City of Houston last spring, and it was an interesting experience. Climate change definitely has a lot of factors that affect sidewalks, and of course, when we talk about sidewalks, we're typically talking about concrete, and it is a material like any other material. It has stressors and it has different things that affect it. My kids all know this one rule about concrete is that it always cracks. It's always going to crack, no matter what you do to it. And so we designed it in a way to try to limit that crack and control where those cracks go. But the things that affect concrete cracking are temperature and precipitation, both of which are dramatically changing as the climate changes. Our temperature extremes have increased as we saw this winter. We had a long period of freezing, which we don't necessarily design our sidewalks for. And our precipitation patterns are changing so that we don't get little rains, we get heavy rains, then we get long dries. And all of these things serve to flex and change the way our soil moves around our sidewalks. And so all these things really increase cracking and movement. They increase the degradation of concrete itself. And this up to the level of reducing the lifespan of concrete. Some studies show as much as 10 to 12 years of lifespan coming off of concrete. And of course, the sidewalk and streets are our most exposed concretes. There's nothing protecting them unless we're planting trees and other pieces of infrastructure around them. And they also estimate that it could nearly double the cost of maintaining these sidewalks. If we're trying to fill in cracks and account for any kind of heaving of the soil, those are all extra expenses. And as we've discussed on these panels, that negatively impacts communities of need disproportionately. So the need for maintenance is increasing because of climate change, and also the way we design and build these systems. So the city has certain standards. And I wouldn't say that they're bad standards, but they're definitely not the best standards that are out there in terms of how we seal, how thick they are, kind of the cure times, and all of these things that go into design. And so we need to look at how we build these sidewalks and what the maintenance requirements will be and how those will change over time. And of course, how does this affect climate change? Well, if we have proper sidewalks, as we've all discussed, these are networks, right? And so the more people that can use them, the less cars are on the street, and the less cars equals a reduction in carbon. And so it's a cycle. The more people we can get walking and biking, the less increase in climate change we have.
Very good. Thank you, Peter. And I want to thank all of the panelists. I'm afraid we are a bit overlong and don't have time for questions, so I'll now turn to Councilmember David Robinson, who will bring on panel 3.
And David, real quick before you get started, I do want to acknowledge Vice Mayor Pro Tem Martha Castex Tatum has joined us and has been with us for a while. And thank you. There will be questions at the end, so stick around, everybody.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Mayor. Thank you so much for your leadership and for Smart Growth America being here, and the panelists for that excellent session. Our next session, the panel 3, is called Connections Require Connections. And in this case, we're talking about pedestrian connections requiring partnering connections, how we put things together. And I'd like to welcome panel 3 and introduce this panel, esteemed experts in their field. We'll hear from Craig Rayborn, who's the Transportation Director at the Houston-Galveston Area Council, who's also a relative newbie, a new kid on the block, as David Fields and Veronica were introduced. Craig, glad to have you with us. We're here with Dexter Handy, my friend and chair of the Greater Houston Coalition for Complete Streets. Nice to see you, sir. Chandra Weigel is with us. She's the Associate State Director of the AARP. Thank you, Chandra, for being here. Great to see you. And Tom Lambert is the President and CEO at Metro, our transit agency. Tom, thanks for being here. And finally, on the panel, rounding it out, let's see, I don't want to miss Bill Fulton. Bill Fulton's here. He's the director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University. Bill is also a former mayor. Let it be noted that we have had one current mayor in Sylvester Turner and John Robert, as well as Bill being here to represent other municipalities in their leadership. And then along with Bill is our final panelist is Mr. Jeff Carlton, my friend, the senior principal at Traffic Engineers, Inc., TEI. Welcome to all of you. I know we've got another great panel here, and we're going to jump right in. Tom Lambert, with you, I want to start with a question about investments from Metro and what you all put in to make sidewalk infrastructure and why that's important for your riders.
Well, Councilmember, first of all, let me thank all of the panelists and all of our partners at the city, Link Houston, Complete Communities, because it takes all of us working together to make sure we're moving forward with multimodal plans to give travel options in the region. I want to thank our good friends at Houston-Galveston Area Council, who's also helped us fund projects moving forward. And we recognize in order for transportation to be equitable, it has to be accessible. We recognize that every trip starts with somebody walking or rolling. So as we were developing the Metro Next Moving Forward plan, we recognized we needed to improve access to the 9,000 bus stops in the Metro service area. So our board of directors committed significant funding in our fiscal year budgets for fiscal year 19 and 20, $35 million to improve access to those stops, with a plan to have all those stops completely compliant with the American Disabilities Act by 2024. I want to thank our regional MPO, the Houston-Galveston Area Council, for again investing $30 million more in that plan to help us move those improvements forward. And then as the voters approved the Metro Next Moving Forward plan in 2019 and recognizing the importance of sidewalk access and accessibility access to transit, another $70 million is committed to that plan to make us accessible by 2024. So we recognize the importance, but we recognize it is extremely important that all of the regional partners work together. As Inez said from Link Houston, it takes the advocacy groups, but it takes the city, the county, the management districts, Metro, Houston-Galveston Area Council, everybody working together to make sure we have that shared vision of where we're going with true multimodalism. So Metro is very blessed to be a part of this partnership. And Councilmember, we thank you and Councilmember Alcorn for giving us an opportunity to participate in this panel this afternoon.
Absolutely. Great and essential to have you as one of our connection partners. Tom, one follow-up question. Just in relation to the Metro Next bond program, and noting that that's a capital upgrade project called Universal Accessibility. Can you tell us more a little bit about that initiative?
What it really boils down to is that you've got to make sure that no matter what person's age, disability, or capabilities are, they get easy access to transit. And what universal accessibility is all about is making sure we're doing everything to make that access easier, smoother, safer, more comfortable. And if you do those things, we believe more and more people will use those services from a multimodal standpoint, but it also gives more access, more equitability, more availability for people to have travel choices. And as the former panel said, you know, this is about keeping people living in this community because of walkability and more modes of traveling in the community. So that's what it's all about.
I hear you. And with a nice shout out there to the HGAC, Craig, we might turn to you in your relatively new role with the Council of Governments with our Metropolitan Planning Organization, and just note that in 2012, HGAC released a planning guide called Pedestrian Pathways. And although many statistics have changed, many of the main themes remain the same. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that guide is, how that's still relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for the opportunity to present this and talk about this guide a little bit. So yeah, it's kind of impressive that a document that's almost 10 years old is still potentially a really good resource for people that are interested in understanding what makes good design for sidewalks. And that's really what the Pedestrian Pathways document did, is it outlines what the characteristics are for the walking experience. And that's really important for helping people understand what it is that they want to look for, and when they're talking to the people on that first panel that we had today, when they're talking to you and the other council members, how to articulate what it is that they're looking for. And so at the really high level, the thing that I think a document like that Pedestrian Pathways report really did is it empowered people to talk about their own pedestrian needs and experiences. And one of the ways that the HGAC followed up on that then was with development of some sidewalk inventory tools as well, and ways in which people can go out and kind of assess their sidewalks and document it. That form you can fill out sort of describes what the sidewalks and pedestrian experience is like. And that was a really helpful tool as well.
Those surveys can be great for that micro scale. And, with I suppose the planning arm of HGAC is 13 counties wide and the transportation planning side is 8 counties wide. What about that regional nature of the HGAC do you think challenges you perhaps or provides opportunity for some of those details?
Sure. Well, as a regional agency, our focus is trying to provide services to everyone. As the MPO that I lead, trying to provide services, a good transportation system to everyone in that 8-county area. And so beyond Houston, we want to provide opportunities for people in those other surrounding counties to have access to good pedestrian infrastructure as well. And so that's part of what we do as an MPO.
And you and I certainly have seen that played out across policy making at the Transportation Policy Council with challenges to suburban or rural environments compared to what we have in the city. And I'm again reflecting on some of the earlier panels with Director Caceres, turning to you, Chandra, from the AARP's perspective about the Greater Houston Coalition for Complete Streets. I know we've got you and Dexter with us, and involved in so many different sidewalk initiatives and audits throughout the city. Chandra, maybe you can share with us a little bit about AARP's resources and how you advocate for better sidewalks.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Robinson. First of all, AARP came to this work. Part of our social mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And here's a couple things that we do know. By 2030, 1 in 5 people in the United States will be over the age of 65. And from that age group, another thing that we learn is that most people, once they buy into their communities, they want to stay there as long as they can. And so a part of what AARP has done, they have assembled a whole host of wonderful information about what a livable community looks like. And part of a livable community is walkability and sidewalks. So if you want to know more about some of the tools that we actually have a walk audit facilitator's guide. So if you have a community group and you want to get started, they have a facilitator's guide. And we also have the toolkit that has the individual worksheets. Now, since COVID, we went back to the drawing board and simplified this a little bit by creating some sheets that can be downloaded. And these 3 particular sheets are particularly important because we are encouraging people to stay safe. And as you're staying safe, try to avoid the crowds and the groups, of course. And so these are the community walk audit worksheet. The second one is who's using the street. As you're doing your, as an auditor, you stand there for a few minutes and figure out who's on that street. And in the past, when we've done these with our various community partners, we have done them in high traffic areas like around our multi-service centers, around some of our schools and some of our public places. And the last one is the walk audit roadmap, which you quite literally can illustrate where you are and what you're seeing around you. Now, some of the ideal partners for doing these particular walk audits, of course, has been the Houston Complete Streets Coalition under Dexter Handy's leadership. We've also partnered, and you always want Metro there. Anything transportation related, you want Metro as a part of it. But we've also worked with the super neighborhoods and community folks. And when we work with community folks, one of the things that we were able to do was to connect people sometimes with their local council members, with their district council members, as well as to show them how to use the city's 311 app. So those are some of the things that have come out of these various partnerships. And I'm going to stop there because I know my partner in crime, Dexter, is next. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great resources from AARP. Dexter, I know you're working with them. Tell us about your role.
Yes, I'm going to kind of go into a little more detail of what Chandra's saying, because she's given a very, very good highlight of it all. And we've been working with them for several years now. We know that there are a lot of unusable sidewalks, unsafe crosswalks. I should say this, sometimes you shouldn't have to be Usain Bolt to get across one street to the next. There's poor walking conditions. Sidewalks are incomplete and poor signaling. Like I said, 30 seconds to get across, but sometimes it seems like it's a lot less than that, especially if you're a senior citizen. And the Complete Streets Coalition, we're there for everybody from 8 months to 80 years and beyond. So we want it safe for everybody. So our vision with these walk audits is as a citywide, hopefully contribute to a citywide sidewalk plan that promotes walkability, safety, and mobility for all ages. And our goal is to do these walk audits and give the city planners something that they can work with from the community of volunteers. And we've been talking a lot with Mr. Fields, David Fields, Mr. Rayborn. I definitely want to look at the tools that you have too. But in light of where we're at right now, we've been using the tools that AARP has provided us. And we found out that sometimes these tools are good, sometimes they're not. A 7-page pamphlet is not necessarily the best thing to use when you're out on a windy street on a Saturday morning. And also we found out that sometimes if we get everybody together and we look at one particular area, 14 people is too many. So we're looking at going to smaller groups of people. We're looking at training these folks. And I should mention, we're going to have a walk audit training session through AARP on the 6th of October. More to come from Chandra in the coming days. And we'll probably do more than just one session. But why are we doing this? Well, the reasons to conduct this audit, and I'm actually quoting AARP's list, we can increase a safe, pedestrian, and friendly environment. We can boost social interaction among our neighbors. We increase opportunities for exercise in our communities. Walking does a lot there. We can reduce traffic congestion if we get more people walking and less people driving. And For some of you out there who are homeowners, it will increase your property values if we have walkability in our neighborhoods. We're looking at certain things like how easy is it to cross the streets and intersections? What are the sidewalk conditions? And a lot of you have seen what they look like in some areas. None of them are bad, some of them are good. Driver behavior. What good is walking if the driver doesn't see you? So we want to look at distracted drivers as well as we do these audits. Overall safety, can we get across from one to the other? And comfort and appeal. Downtown has some very, very good sidewalks and very, very wide. Other neighborhoods, well, the streets are incomplete. The sidewalks are incomplete. And then overall ratings and observations. As Chandra mentioned earlier, the old kit had like about 7 pages. The new kit has, I think, 2 pages. And we're looking at coming out with ways to craft what we look at. Sometimes we look at too large of an area. We're looking at getting smaller groups of people to look at smaller parts. And then finally, we really want to give the city something that they can work with. So the Walk Audit Toolkit is our starting point, but there may be data points that y'all need as planners and engineers. And so we're going to continue to partner on all that.
That's excellent. Yeah, thank you, Dexter. And I know you do have an event coming up on October 6th. Am I right about that?
That's correct, sir.
All right, and gives us great opportunities to test some of those partnerships. And speaking of that, I know a great resource to the city and to all of us working in this field has been the Kinder Institute. And Bill, from your perspective, as an important partner to the city in providing research about sidewalks and walkability, what can you tell us more about Kinder Institute and what you've been looking at in Gulfton? Have you seen the improvement in the audit since it was completed?
Yeah.
Some of those things.
Great, thank you, David. It's a thrill to be here, and it's a thrill to see the city partnering with Smart Growth America. My first professional engagement in Houston almost a decade ago, before I came to the Kinder Institute, was actually when I was the policy director of Smart Growth America, and we worked with then Mayor Parker and then Council Member Gonzalez on the first Complete Streets ordinance. And so that's, I think, David, how I met you originally, perhaps.
I believe so. Yep.
I want to give 2 examples of what we have done that we're building on the previous 2 speakers about how important pedestrian walkability is in situations that, for reasons and in situations you wouldn't expect. The first one was, one of the first things we did when I came to the Kinder Institute was we did a parking utilization study of Rice Village. And we found that even though nobody can ever find a place to park in Rice Village, at any given time, within a quarter mile of Ground Zero in Rice Village, there's 1,000 vacant parking spaces. But part of the problem was nobody wanted to walk from the parking spaces 2 blocks to wherever they were going, because the pedestrian environment in Rice Village is pretty bad, even though it is a supposedly dense walkable village setting. So I think one of the things that walkability does and sidewalks do is they actually encourage people to park in more logical places, not to cruise for parking spaces. That takes cars off the street, that improves congestion in these areas. So that's one example. The other example, which we're really proud of, was the walking audit we did in conjunction with the residents in Gulfton. And I think that one of the most important things to say about that, David, is that Gulfton is not the kind of neighborhood you would typically think of as a neighborhood where you have to improve sidewalks and improve walkability. It is a suburban scale neighborhood with very wide streets. But it's also a neighborhood that has for Houston, very low vehicle ownership rates, a lot of transit usage, and a lot of pedestrians. And so I think a lot of Houston falls into that category where it was designed to suburban scale, but it's now being used by the residents in a more urban way. Yeah. We did our walking audit and our sidewalk audit together with the residents. That led Connect Communities and the Super Neighborhood to begin to advocate for a series of pedestrian improvements and traffic calming efforts out in Gulfton, which the city finally went along with. So I just think it's a great example of, number one, understanding that the context in Houston is often different, that people use suburban settings in urban ways, and secondly, that a combination of research that we do, community engaged research, along with advocacy by the advocacy groups, can lead to real change.
Well, I think that's excellent. And of course, Gulfton is the densest part of the city of Houston. So, you know, with that, of course, Bill, with your perspective from the university and with Smart Growth America, you know that coupled with that walkability also comes, you know, increased health and economic benefits, and social benefits. Do you have any final thoughts about that?
Well, I don't think there's any question about the health benefits. And I think Dexter made a very good point, which is that the more walkable the neighborhood, the generally speaking, the higher the property value. So curiously enough, people who may be auto-oriented in their thinking can benefit economically from a more pedestrian-oriented environment. But I think the important point is that I want to make is that even in a suburban city, sidewalks are becoming more and more important as we change our lifestyle.
Right, and at the neighborhood scale, I'm very glad you mentioned the Super Neighborhood Alliance. Having grown up in that playground, that's such an important way and way in which so many of our speakers and panelists live in a daily world. So I know there's many members of the Alliance who are on this call today, and we will have opportunities to follow up with everyone. But while we're talking about neighborhoods and some of the other tools, Jeff, I know you're here in part to talk about your professional perspective, doing work across the city, and perhaps in particular about tax increment reinvestment zones, the TERSs, the management districts, and how those two governmental constructs really play into the building and the improvement of the pedestrian realm. Maybe turn you off on that one.
Thanks, Council Member. I think, you know, listening across all the panels, you quickly see that walkability requires, you know, many different partners to come together to be successful. And in Houston, where management districts and TERSs are often the entities that are doing a fair amount of the infrastructure implementation and maintenance, they are really important aspects. And so we work closely with a number of districts from the East End, 3rd Ward, Sharpstown, Montrose, West Chase, Spring Branch, all who are increasingly recognizing that, you know, part of a TERS in some level is to support economic development, to support quality of life, to support the safety and health of the residents and people visiting the businesses in the area. The walkability is the key pillar for that. And it is something that developers are looking for, that community residents are looking for when they choose where they live, where they work, where they want their kids to go to school. And so those entities have really started to focus a lot on walkability, and we've been working closely with folks to do really detailed kind of the walk audits that Dexter and Chandra have talked about at the parcel level, because we want to understand how to best spend the funding that is available, that the TERS have and partners can bring most effectively. For example, in Montrose, when we looked at every sidewalk, we found a lot of the sidewalks are in good condition, but on almost every block, there's one parcel or one gap, and your walking trip is defined by the most difficult part. If you're in a wheelchair, one gap in the sidewalk can prevent you from making a trip. And so that allowed the TERS to really be thoughtful about where to prioritize. And a number of different TERS and management districts have also then used that data to create partnerships with, in Montrose, it was with Harris County Precinct 1, Commissioner Ellis, and Councilmember Kamen brought money to move forward on a number of walkability and sidewalk projects. In others, Old 6th Ward, East End, other Harris County partnerships. Metro has been a big partner to folks like West Chase and others. So bringing smart data to make good decisions brings partnerships and funding together to move projects forward.
I know that is true, and as one who's benefited from all of those studies that really feed into what happens from our capital improvement plan and those investments in the infrastructure and streetscape, we see that. And I know my colleagues, the district council members in particular, are now provided with these tools to help really drive where the investment is made in our neighborhoods. But I know that also sets certain expectations. I know sometimes a master plan doesn't get filled or fully realized. And I'm wondering if, just in a follow-up brief response, if you could identify any of the challenges of implementing the recommendations that are put forward in these studies, and what good have you seen from them, short of those that are unfulfilled?
Well, I think, every plan, I try to make them as aspirational as possible, so that if you aim high and still get 80% of the way there, you may not have accomplished everything, but you've made great strides. But walkability, sidewalks can be a challenging project to implement. There's a lot of details that are required, how to work around trees, how to make sure that people understand that the first 20 feet of what they perceive as their yard is actually public right-of-way for access of people. And then obviously all of the implementation challenges of funding, of making sure we're being thoughtful about drainage. And so those are really need to be thought about up front and part of the conversation with the community, so that people don't learn about the project the day, the backhoe comes to start, creating the right of way for the sidewalk. And so getting smarter about the conversations, being clear about what our vision and our goals are, and then really being dogged to execute these things, because there is a lot of detail, a lot of work, even in what seems like a simple sidewalk project.
Excellent. And I know we are running down on time. I've got the thought in mind that Councilmember Alcorn made at the outset of this program. This is not a forum within which we promise to build the sidewalk outside anyone's property or neighborhood, but we are interested in all those aspirational thoughts. I love the way you put that, Jeff. But I do want to, just thinking in terms of broad, big strokes, one more question for the group, and I might put this to the first to chime in or feel passionate about it, and that's with regard to Austin, Texas, recently approving bond Proposition B, the 2020 Active Transportation and Safety Bond, which includes $80 million for sidewalks. And here's a rhetorical question: should the city of Houston consider the same action?
Yes.
Dexter, going out on a limb, tell me more.
Well, how much money do we put into our highways? How much money do we put into our other infrastructures? Compared to that, how much do we put into our sidewalks? Everybody has to walk from their car or from their bicycle or from the bus to wherever they're going. Let's put some money into the sidewalks as well.
Other thoughts, Bill?
I don't think there's any question that we can't rely on a system where property owners have to maintain the sidewalks. That's just not going to work. I mean, imagine if every property owner were responsible for the patch of road out in front of their house or their business. We would have the same situation for vehicles, and that would be viewed as intolerable. So I think we have to put more public investment into sidewalks, which are a public facility.
Excellent. Anyone else on that one? I think that might be a great way to conclude this panel, Councilmember Alcorn, and I think we're pretty much right on schedule, maybe a little bit over, but let me hand it back to you.
Okay, great. And now the time we will spend the rest of the time answering the public's questions. There's lots of nuts and bolts questions that we're getting in tonight, and some that have been submitted previously. It's going to be hard to get to all of them with the time allowed, but like I promised, we'll be busily getting answers in writing to everyone who has submitted a question. So I'll start.
Let me also add that this is the first of its kind initiative, but we're building on a theme here that's going to give us lots to work about in our town meetings coming up as COVID allows and so forth. So thanks, Councilmember.
Right, and so we will just kind of alternate, Councilmember Robinson, with some of the questions that I know you have in front of you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll start off. This was brought, I think somebody mentioned Usain Bolt having to, cross the street in a, record time. It's not, sidewalks are a part of the piece, but it's also signalized crossings. They tend to be far apart in many parts of the city. So people have to walk long distances to get to safe crossings. It's especially problematic for older pedestrians or transit riders who need to get to a bus stop. That's nowhere near a safe crossing. And may I ask somebody, and just raise your hand, panelists, if you'd like to tackle that. What are thoughts on safe crossings to make it a little bit more pedestrian friendly? Don't leave me hanging out here. Somebody has to raise their hand.
You got Dexter.
Okay,
Yes.
Dexter, take it away.
Yes, that is one of my pet peeves. And first of all, I ask everybody, if you find an area where it's not safe to cross, we've got the Vision Zero map toolkit. Get out there on the Houston Vision Zero site and document that area. We also have 311. Now, I will have to say in the past, it took 311 2 years to get back to me when I documented some unsafe things, but they actually got to me last month with 2 answers. Things are improving. But we need citizens to identify those areas before they're identified when somebody gets hit by a car. And I want to thank the mayor for addressing some of those areas, but we need to continue to just get everybody to pipe in and identify where it's unsafe to cross. And let's see if we can't get our engineers and our planners to fix some of these.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Robinson.
I think I've got a question, and I see Director Haddock here. That it's a contracting question, Director, and it seems the question reads: it seems like subcontractors do much of the work on our sidewalks, and sometimes a year or more after the repair or replacement's been made, parts of the sidewalk will settle unevenly, sometimes so unevenly that a power chair would have trouble negotiating the sidewalk. And question then is there any part of the contract that requires warranty or repairs for any period of time after the work's been completed? How do you deal with that?
Well, so for all of our contractor projects, we do have a year warranty after construction. But just because something is settled, don't hesitate to reach out and contact us, and particularly through 311, because we want to make sure that we provide that safe passage.
I got it. I know that's frustrating. Sometimes, I mean, I will tell you, I see so much good work going on out there from the Public Works Department and many good things happening, but I know that we've left some room for improvement. Is that a fair statement?
There's always room for improvement.
Thank you, Director.
Thank
Sallie,
you.
back to you.
Okay. This is probably for Margaret Wallace Brown. I have a few questions about neighborhoods without sidewalks, which I know you already addressed. There are a little bit of commentary about making sure to include the you already addressed the need to have stakeholder engagement on this. There's been a request to make sure and include the Super Neighborhood Alliance, all the super neighborhoods, especially of those that don't have it. Also a comment about if a fee in lieu of program is instituted, they request that money stay nearby. So that's one thing that was asked. And also, where streets have open ditch drainage, where are sidewalks to be placed if the ditch takes up the available right-of-way space? And how does the city and how do home builders deal with obstructions such as trees, fire hydrants, street signage, and power poles that place pedestrians in harm's way if sidewalks are to be built around these obstructions?
So the ditches are a big issue for us, and that is in fact one of the reasons that a property owner can get an exemption from having to construct a sidewalk in front of their structure. We do not want to impinge on the ditches. We need them to do their job. And so how do we adjust maybe it's the buffer is a little bit less wide and the sidewalk remains the same side. Maybe both are adjusted a little bit in order to get, to accommodate the ditch and still stay on the public right of way. We do have an opportunity where if the property owner is is willing, we can do an easement where they can build the public sidewalk on their property through an easement agreement with the city of Houston and work around things like trees or ditches or something like that. So there are a number of opportunities to adjust. Like, we are very interested in being context sensitive, in being complete in our network, in providing the best and safest pedestrian access for Houstonians. And so we'll work with property owners to try to figure out the best way to accomplish that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've got a next question and a suggested person to answer it. This might be for Director Caceres. It's a question from Super Neighborhood Leader Keith Downey from Cashmere Gardens. He's wondering whether stakeholders have input to address the location of new sidewalks within their communities. And I'm just thinking about one of the points that Jeff Carlton made in that last panel about those gaps that can really compromise the ability for us to access neighborhoods and all points in our communities. And I guess we need to know what citizens can do, but I want to ask you, Director, if you hear from your disability community, if you have a way to respond.
So, Council Member, there's a couple ways. One of the ways is through the sidewalk study that my colleague Laura Patiño is spearheading in the recovery office, but also through our pedestrian accessibility review program. Just because we receive a pedestrian accessibility review application, and I want to be very clear, does not mean that we're going to be able to fulfill that request. But what we can do, Council Member, is work with our partners in the Planning and Development Department, in the Houston Public Works Department, and our council member offices. Council member came and has done a significant amount of work through her council district service funds to assist us with sidewalks that maybe didn't meet the eligibility criteria for the pedestrian accessibility review program, but there was funding available to meet fulfill those requests that way. So even though we may not fulfill every single pedestrian accessibility review application we get, still submit them to us because we can work with our partner organizations in and outside of the city to address those sidewalks.
Excellent. And those additional resources come to bear, but excellent point about the district council members. And, you know, I think to Mr. Downey, I would also remind them that among the at-large, of course, Councilmember Alcorn and I are here with our coverage, right? The full city, where we can come in to assist any of the district council members. So if there's any relationship or if there's a lack of relationships, please feel free to reach out to the other 5 council members who can help you bring some of these resources. So Keith, I know you and I are acquainted, so help us know. I know you're very capable. District Council Member Tarsha Jackson is our newest council member colleague, but we are committed as the pilot program that Laura Patiño has been working on. Laura, do you have anything to add to that? Putting you on the spot here. Wonder if you can unmute and maybe take your camera.
Sure, thank you, Council Member. Well, I think, you know, the sidewalk study is really going to give us that holistic view of how to bring in the different efforts that each department is doing and put them all together to figure out how to solve the multiple challenges. So from implementation, from policy, from funding, and specifically to the challenges that were brought up by Director Caceres in accessibility and mobility. And those are specifically what we're going to be trying to do to model with the case studies in these 2 pilot studies and pilot communities. And so through the opportunity of engaging with the Cashmere Gardens community and the Gulfton community, we want to be able to capture the learnings and the best practices to be able to replicate them citywide.
Right. So, of course, again, Tarsha Jackson in District B and Cashmere Gardens, and Councilmember Edward Pollard in District J, where the pilot's going on. Councilmember Alcorn, I think that's back to you now.
Okay. This question: Houston needs a comprehensive sidewalk plan which meets ADA requirements, creates a pedestrian-friendly environment, and accomplishes connectivity for the community. With numerous political subdivisions constructing sidewalks, are there guidelines to ensure consistency in design, signage, and capacity for both pedestrians and bikes?
So I'll take this one. Yeah, I think we do need a pedestrian plan. I do think we need to figure out how we want to through the Vision Zero action plan, how we want to identify pedestrian infrastructure and use a plan as a way to figure out how to pay for it and in what order, what's the priority, where are the more important intersections. Yeah, I think for the 600 and something square miles of the city of Houston, we do need to plan for how to get pedestrians safely from point A to point B. It's not in my budget right now, but I'd be happy to do it if someone could help me figure out how to get it in my budget.
Thank you.
Maybe staying right there with you, Director, I've got a question here on our list in the Q&A that asks, does it make sense to make property owners pay for a $103 minimum fee to fix their sidewalk? How do you respond?
Well, that is one of the questions that we ask ourselves now, and you know, a year is a great teacher, and we are looking at those costs and those fees. Those fees are based on the amount of time and the staff that it takes to review those applications. Those are all vetted through the finance department, and so they are actual cost of service. And how can we do it quicker and faster so that we can charge less? That's what we're looking at.
Excellent.
Okay, this one, it talks about the infrastructure design manual that requires CIP and private development projects to build new sidewalks better and wider. I don't know if this is true, but according to this questioner, however, the city's maintenance team still replaces old narrow sidewalks with new narrow sidewalks. Similarly, HPW's water and wastewater teams do not require contractors to bring sidewalks up to the current standards. When will the city begin requiring all of the HPW teams to start complying with the new wider sidewalk standards in the IDM? Director Haddock, that's probably a you question.
I'm to get to my buttons here. So the restoration of sidewalks typically is 10 feet or less whenever we're out repairing a water line or something like that. And so they're matching what was out there. I do think that whenever we have a bigger project, that if there are places that we're missing the mark, we need to evaluate that and see what we need to do moving forward. But for the most part, we're providing ourselves with the same guidance that we would work with through Margaret's group of reviewing things. You know, if it's truly we dug up a water line and replaced it, we're typically putting the sidewalk back that matches the adjacent sidewalks.
Thank you.
Director Haddock, I think of staying with you again here. In this case, the question is coming right at you. It says, Director Haddock said that they are willing, Public Works presumably, are willing to take immediate action for safety issues on sidewalks. But how do we address an entire neighborhood of deteriorating and missing sidewalks? Can this be addressed one homeowner at a time via 311? I'm certain the answer is no. So what is the answer to attack an entire neighborhood full of challenges?
So, and we may have different definitions of safety. Typically, when we're talking about safety matters, it's certainly something that causes an immediate safety hazard is what we're talking about in addressing that. Whole subdivisions, right now, we do not currently have a funded program to address only sidewalks in neighborhoods, unless it is in combination with a street rehabilitation or some other project that we are doing in the neighborhood. It's a good question, and I expect it's one that you and Councilmember Alcorn will be weighing as we move forward as to how do we prioritize where our funding goes, and what are our highest priorities, and how does that match our goals for the city.
And maybe just one follow-up on that. When you do know that it's coming, let's say in a neighborhood that has a school or has a metro line, and we might pitch that to Tom, but what do you do to reach out to the other agencies that have jurisdiction there to check and make sure that we're combining forces with maximum impact?
Well, any of our partner agencies that do projects in our right of way are working either through our interagency group or through our city engineer's office. And the partnership that we have right now with Metro and with Harris County is one of the strongest that we've had in a long time. We're leveraging each other before we get to the field, as opposed to addressing conflicts once we've gotten there.
So Tom, I think with that question, I know you and I collaborate a lot on combining resources and comparing notes. Maybe you can follow up on the director there.
Well, I want to build on what the director said, and that's exactly what we're doing. I want to thank both the planning department and the public works department, Veronica and David and the Metro team. We're working very closely. As Director Haddock said, we're doing it before we get out in the field to make sure that there is close collaboration, the opportunity to really get synergy where we're leveraging off this partnership to do more, not less. And so that's in all aspects of what we're doing. And as we look to build the Metro Next moving forward, plan out whether it's a bus rapid transit corridor, a boost corridor, traffic signal prioritization, sidewalk improvement, stop improvement, we're working collectively so Public Works and Planning knows exactly where we're at, and also close coordination with the mayor's office with disabilities as well. So there is an extremely close partnership, and I'm very proud of that, and we are very appreciative of that at Metro.
Council member, maybe before we go back to you for the next question, just from David and Veronica, if either of you have any fresh insights to that collaboration as we try to break down the silos of our independent departments and authorities. Veronica, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, we work very closely with our agency partners. David and I joke that some days that we spend meetings all day with the same people because that's how closely we are working together. And I will add, kind of in a slight tangent, when we look at full neighborhoods, as Director Buggs mentioned earlier, when it comes to complete communities, we do our best to use our dollars to the best that we can. And so there are times, even though we do have our tight definitions of sidewalks that we fund, we are trying to prioritize the complete communities for extra funding that we have to improve the sidewalks and improve the walkability in those areas, particularly the complete communities that really address that as a high priority.
David, do you have a word?
Yeah, just quickly. Veronica and I both came from the private sector before we got here. We'd worked in many different cities, and we both reiterate to each other that not every city has the relationships between the departments and the agencies that we have found here. The mayor's, one of his first directions to me when I got here was, do not allow silos to stop the work we need to do. You are in charge with breaking those down. And it's not just Public Works and Planning, but Health Department and Office of People with Disabilities, the Police Department, the Fire Department. We're all, certainly our external partners that are on the call today. All of us are working hard on this same mission.
Very good. Councilmember.
Okay, will you consider special sidewalk ordinances for townhome neighborhoods that are not TOD or walkable places? The current sidewalk ordinances for single-family homes are not a good fit for the denser townhome neighborhoods. There's more pedestrian traffic. The sidewalks are more likely to be blocked because of shorter setbacks, and the extra need for on-street parking makes emergency vehicles hard to get through if sidewalk buffers are consistently wide. Any thoughts on townhome standards?
I'd like to understand that question a little bit more. I apologize. The housekeeping is in the background. I'm sorry for that.
No, that's all right.
I'd like to understand that question just a little bit more before I answered it, and perhaps if the person who wrote it would actually send me an email, I'd be grateful.
Okay, we'll get more details. That might be too specific. We'll get more details on where exactly that is. I appreciate that. Something that that Peter Caldwell mentioned. Someone has asked about, you talked about the city standards, Peter, but that are good but could be better. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant there and things that could be improved as far as our sidewalk standards?
Yeah, when I'm doing private development and private projects, we often seal sidewalks. We don't just leave cedar expansion joints exposed. we have a different approach to drainage. You know, I'm kind of speaking right now specifically about the project that was put in by the House, and you know, a wall was part of that system because of retention needed, and for me, it's not a high standard of drainage, so I've already modified it so that it won't erode behind the sidewalk. You know, let's see. You caught me off guard, Sally. Council member. No, it's okay. You know, the thicknesses that we use should be looked at. I think one of the things that I saw in these kind of sidewalk projects is that they're not necessarily permitted. They don't go through a straight design process. And in a design process, we look at things like geotechnical reports, utility locations. We're making some very deliberate decisions about how they're installed. And a lot of these decisions in these programs are made on site. So if you walk my neighborhood, which is Oak Forest, you'll see some situations where they're trying to save trees, which is a good thing, but in the way they've done it, they've kind of pushed the limits of what sidewalk can really do about how close it is to curbs and how far off the ground it is. So I think there's just some things to look about at that process. Just you know, speed is appreciated and kind of the essence in these systems, but sometimes that means we're not necessarily looking at all of the design aspects that we would normally want to look at.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Councilmember, you've got the designer there, and while you got him, I think as an architect, I want to ask him a question that comes from our audience here, from Barry Goodman, who is working with a number of neighborhoods with his firm. So he says Houston needs a needs a comprehensive sidewalk plan which meets ADA requirements, creates a pedestrian-friendly environment, and accomplishes connectivity for the community. With numerous political subdivisions constructing sidewalks, are there guidelines to ensure consistency in design, signage, and capacity for both pedestrians and bikes? And here I've been hearing you refer to the details behind you in the photograph that your firm works with. And I know that we at the city have the infrastructure design manual. So what are your thoughts about bridging some of those gaps?
Well, I want to be clear. My firm didn't design this. This was a City of Houston project.
Thank you for that.
You know, and another thing I'd like to make clear is that we often refer to ADA as kind of the gold standard, but from my perspective, it's actually the bare minimum for requirements. Right. It's actually an exclusive law that has requirements that don't address everybody's needs and requirements. So I think, you know, that, you know, thinking about in terms of universal design and how we really make these spaces accessible, and understand that sidewalks being interconnected actually is getting across the street as well. You know, one thing I've noticed a lot of times is that you could have a great sidewalk, but as soon as you get to the gutter, now it's not an accessible route to get across the street. And I think these are all parts of looking at how we keep our system, you know, complete and usable. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question for you.
No, I think you're doing great. That wasn't really specific, but in a way, you mentioned the ADA as the baseline, like a building code where you must surpass certain minimum standards, but it's not the limit.
That's right.
And I think of that a little bit like we in the design world. You know, that is in some ways our Hippocratic oath. It's like first do no harm. You know, first we must meet the minimum standard. And I wonder, Jeff Carlton, if he's still with us, if he also in the world of design and practice has any thoughts about that and ideas about the existing infrastructure design manual or other tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, I think, you know, the infrastructure design manual has come a long way in even the last 5 years in the types of thinking and the types of guidelines and the expectations that it sets for all classifications of streets, that we're getting to where, you know, we have wider sidewalks mandated for thoroughfares and transit streets where you can actually walk next to someone and have a dignified conversation. It's not setting up for a single file trip. So I think that's a great starting point, and commend the city for that. Sometimes then it comes down to holding people to that standard, either through the design process where frankly, a lot of people who design sidewalks don't walk places. And so getting more people who actually care about that experience involved in the design process. And then, the following through the management, the maintenance, and making sure it doesn't degrade over time when you make these investments in a quality experience. And Peter mentioned the crossings of the intersections. Curb ramps are another huge issue that, you can have a great sidewalk and then you get to the street and you just can't cross. And so there's a lot of moving parts. Trying to tie that all in with drainage and shifting soils and trees is really challenging, but really requires paying very close attention to those details.
I think that's great. Councilmember, I know you started with an explanation about your role with Smart Growth America and with Bill Fulton's experience here, and he and the other Smart Growth folks. Maybe it'd be appropriate to wrap up with a final comment from Bill or some of the Smart Growth America folks. Bill, do you want to add to what's been said?
Well, I just want to say, and David, that I'm that because of my visual impairment, I don't drive, and so therefore I'm a Midtown Montrose pedestrian a lot of the time. And I just think I want to say, Abby, thank you very much, or council member Sallie. I'm sorry, it's late. Sallie, I want to say thank you. I was thinking of my council member, right?
Yeah.
Sallie, I want to say thank you very much for bringing this to the attention of everybody here in Houston. I think it's great to have this focus, and I hope that everybody on this call works with the advocacy groups in town, many of which were represented here today, to really move the ball forward so that we get not just better sidewalks, but a higher quality pedestrian environment in important locations where people walk a lot.
Great, thank you. I think with that, and we'll let Smart Growth go at the very end, Councilmember Robinson, and I think you and I can wrap this up. I know we didn't get to some of your questions. I apologize for that. We could go on all night, but again, we will get you questions and your questions answered in writing. Really think this has been a great dialogue. I just want to do a little bit of a call to action. Get out there and walk somewhere. My office does No Car Friday, and we try as best we can to not get in our cars on Friday and try to walk and bike and see. You can really see a lot when you're not in your car, and you can see things that need fixed. A lot of people ask questions about what can the common citizen do. Man, report things to 311, educate your neighbors about who's responsible for what. Talk to us about creative ways. John Roberts certainly brought up some ideas from other cities that we need to look into. I see this as a very start of our conversation, not an end. We're not doing this and we're just going to wrap it up. We're going to really review this. This is recorded. I'll be watching it again. We want to capitalize on all the good ideas and some of the concerns that the community has with equity and other things that have been brought up tonight. Additionally, Smart Growth America suggested we announce a forthcoming advocacy guide for sidewalks. And in conversations with Public Works, I've learned that this document is actually in the works. They are listening here. Alana Reed from Public Works is listening here. She's just a gem on communications. So we want the public to have a guide, something that all the information that's come out tonight, everything that you need to know about sidewalks, who's responsible for what, who to contact about different things, all needs to kind of be in one place. And Public Works, thankfully, is working on that resource guide as we speak, and it will be distributed to the community via council member offices and the city's website. And we'll hope to have it available at the city's upcoming CIP meeting. So I'll just, before I pass it off to Councilmember Robinson and Smart Growth America, I just want to say thank you to everyone, especially my staff, who has really put together a great program and worked very hard to make it run smoothly. The technology gods were on our side today, so that's good. And just, we hope we highlighted how important sidewalks are to the city of Houston and how we are open to exploring ways to make sidewalks better all over the city. So with that, I'll let Councilmember Robinson wrap it up, to be followed by Mayor Smith at the end.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Alcorn. And, you know, the conversation will continue. This is a great extension of the dialogue and the series of agenda items that we've had on the Transportation Technology and Infrastructure Committee. So I echo all the thanks to your staff and to mine and to the great folks behind the scenes at Public Works, at Planning, at Metro, at HGAC, Kinder, and on, lest I forget all of our panelists. Thank you for your time. And I know with things like the recent event on Friday of Parking Day, you know, these are things where the challenge that Councilmember Alcorn just threw down can be picked up and we can run with it. This is the engagement of all of our professional communities. I'm talking to you, AIA Houston. This was the first of its kind initiative for a sidewalk summit, but I know you and I have spent a great part of the last few years since Hurricane Harvey working on visions for a more resilient city with Houston 2020 visions. And as that's drawing to a close now, we are looking forward to making Houston a better city and building into our future. So it's great to have so many decision makers with us, stakeholders and committed citizens, and just grateful to everybody, including those at Smart Growth America. So perhaps Mayor Smith, if you could wrap it up for us.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, council members. Thank you for including Smart Growth America. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to hear that the commitment and the enthusiasm we saw in the Champions Institute is shared by so much of the leadership in Houston that we've heard tonight. You know, I've listened to your exciting visions for your community. I've heard your aspirational goal of dispelling the perception that Houston is a car-only community. In fact, you've committed to build a community that's truly connected, whether you're a small child going to the playground or to school, or you're an elderly person visiting a neighbor or getting a little exercise, or the visitor to Houston coming to spend some money and has a walkable place to move about and spend that money with you. But I think Mr. Handy may have touched what I think is such an important part and that is overlooked. Remember when we all had front porches? That's how we got to know our neighbors. That's how we got to meet each other. Well, we don't have front porches anymore. And it's the sidewalk and the public space that has become the front porch of the community. And that's where you actually bump into your neighbor, get to know the neighbors in the neighborhood, and you build that sense of community. I think that is something that is almost beyond price. It's a value to a community. But all of these great visions, all of this commitment, all of your aspirational goals, I have to tell you, I think will be very hard to accomplish if you continue to fund your sidewalks and their upkeep and repair solely on the backs of the property owners. Now, just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean you always have to do it that way. So think about some of the lessons from around the country. Smart Growth America wants to be your partner. We look forward to other opportunities to engage and be of help in any way we can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, council member. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank all y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. It was great. Thank you.